Welcome back to another episode of the Punch Out Podcast. Today we've got Harold Mozingo on the show, former minor leaguer with the Royals and the Blue Jays, the owner of Mozingo Baseball, and somebody who's got a lot of experience both playing and coaching. Somebody that I'm going to tap into. So I'm more excited about this for myself too. I can implement some of his wisdom. We talked a little bit off camera about some I don't know if you're gonna call it substances, if you're gonna call it whatever. There's different ways to manipulate the spin of the baseball. And we'll get into all that. But Harold, thanks for coming on, my man.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so this all came about for the people that didn't see the interaction on Twitter. Harold's thinking of starting his own podcast, and he put out a tweet, "Hey, like, who you guys want to see on a new podcast?" And you can go back and look it up. I said, "Hey, like, come on to mine. We'll make it happen." And so it all kind of happened at the last minute. And so I'm super fired up to kind of hear your story. And I know you were drafted twice, once out of high school by the Mets, and then in college at VCU in the 6th round by the Royals. Can you kind of talk to me about your playing career, kind of growing up in small town Virginia and making it all the way up there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like we were talking off camera, you were talking about like doing it your own way, right? Not much help. That was similar story here. As you can imagine, small town. Um, there's not a lot of people like that have played at higher levels to really be able to push you to those new levels, right? So it was mostly just me in the backyard with my family, my mom, dad, brother, and taking a bunch of baseballs out to a football field and long tossing by myself, stuff like that. One of the biggest things, and I talk about it in my EGuide Young Guns. It's one of the first things I talk about. Um, when I was, let's see, 8 years old, 9 years old, we were playing in our first All-Star tournament, and they had a long toss competition, and my mom was the head coach of our team, and each representative got to pick one person. So each team got to pick one representative to go to the long toss competition. Well, she didn't pick me, and the reason was, as she told me, uh, very to the point, you don't have the best arm, so I'm going to go with somebody who has a chance to win the thing. But okay, cool. And then one of the big things growing up was that I always wanted to be the shortstop, and so my mom and dad always coached our teams, and they always said, if you want to play shortstop, you got to have the best arm on the team and be like the captain on the field. So we're at this All-Star tournament. I think I'm the shortstop, right? I'm the coach's son, right? So of course I should play shortstop. Well, the kid that was in the long toss competition, he was on the mound. So if anyone was going to play shortstop over me, it would be him. But no, I was playing first base. There was another kid playing short. And naturally, at 9 years old, you go, Mom, what are you doing? Why am I not playing shortstop? And she said, it was very simple. Get over first base. Like, all right. So in my mind, I was never going to let that happen again. I was determined to have the best arm on the field so I could play shortstop. And that just kind of blossomed into me on this search to try to throw as hard as possible. And luckily for me, what I was saying before kind of worked in my favor, where there wasn't a lot of people like that had really played at a high level to really teach you, so per se, right? So to say. So they just kind of let me do what I wanted to do. So it was like, hey, yeah, you throw hard, you throw strikes. When you go on the mound, just go do what you got to do. And Nolan Ryan was my idol growing up, pitching wise. So I had to have the high leg kick. And I always just thought I had to move very fast. So I had a high leg kick and move fast, try to throw the ball as hard as I can. And everyone just kind of left me alone. So it worked. That quest for trying to play shortstop and just trying to throw as hard as possible just really worked in my favor. So
That's such a
that was that. And then go ahead. Sorry.
I said, "Oh, that's such a good story." Like just hearing that with the shortstop and your mom being the coach, and yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
And so that turned
Yeah.
into high school. You probably did a lot of pitching in high school then.
Yeah. So again, I thought of myself as a shortstop growing up. My freshman year, I make the varsity team as a shortstop. I didn't pitch that year. Um, and it just kind of was as you can imagine, small town, middle of nowhere. If you have a good arm, they're going to stick you on the mound. That's just kind of the way it goes. Probably irrelevant that it's a small town. That's probably anywhere. If you have a good enough arm in high school, they're going to stick you on the mound eventually. So that's what happened. Not I'd always pitched some, but I never was a pitcher. Right, I was a shortstop everywhere I went. My class ring in high school says shortstop. Doesn't say pitcher anywhere, right?
Wow.
Then fast forward, I get into showcase stuff, which is obviously much different now than it was then. But my name showed up on a draft board. So I think I only had a radar gun reading about twice my whole life until my senior year of high school. So I went to this one event. We had scouts there, radar gun. The results got posted about 2 months later, and then with that was like, hey, this is like people that could get drafted, like a draft watch list for this year, and my name shows up, and I'm just thinking, what is this pitching? I'm not a pitcher.
Yeah.
Um, and then fast forward to that year, and I was drafted in the 15th round by the Mets. So at that point, I assumed I was a pitcher. So that's just kind of how it all went down. It actually, good story here. The day I was drafted was my last day of high school ever. So I had my last final exam that morning. Then we had a state quarterfinal game. And during the state quarterfinal game, which I was pitching in, I was drafted in the middle of the game. I didn't know until after the game. The scout that drafted me, Ty Brown, called her during the game and let her know. So I didn't find out till after the game.
That is such a good story, man. Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine like that must have been such an awesome day too. You get done with high school and you get a call or you find out after the game. I mean, yeah, that's something amazing. Like one of the best stories I've heard on the podcast so far, literally with the draft day, and everybody remembers, where they're at and what they were doing with the time they're drafted. And I'm jealous, man. Somebody that was undrafted, like that's that has got to be such a cool day. But I think a really big theme from that, just kind of listening, taking it all in, was like the athleticism that it takes to be a shortstop. And you got your class ring as a shortstop and
Right.
everything like that. Like, do you think there's something to that where you kind of stay athletic, and stay with that shortstop mindset? You kind of take yourself off the mound for a little bit, and then by the time you jump back on, you're miles ahead. Is that kind of what you think?
Oh yeah, look. I think honestly that it's the single biggest thing I contribute to my ultimate success as a pitcher was the fact that exactly what you're saying, the athleticism it took to try to play shortstop at a high level growing up. So I was actually I signed to VCU as a two-way. I was supposed to play the infield and pitch. I did that as a freshman somewhat, but I really decided on my own there that it was time for me to transition into pitching full time. Just because, like I said, I'd never put much effort into pitching, and then I was drafted in the 15th round, which probably looking back may have been a mistake, but we won't go there. Um, but yeah, so so my biggest advice to young kids is to try to play the middle of the field, preferably shortstop. Like if you can be a shortstop at a young age, you can probably transition to pitching fairly easy as you progress in the game.
I think that's some really good advice, and from somebody who, I'm kind of thinking back on my own story while you're saying this. I'm like, man, I played a little bit of shortstop. I played okay, like when I was 13, 14. Okay, I played some shortstop. Like there's something to that, I think, and a lot of the younger kids, especially with more travel ball opportunities happening, more almost year-round type baseball scenarios. I feel like the more well-rounded, I think, the more positions you can play, the more kind of you get to see the whole field, and not pigeonhole yourself too early. I feel like there's definitely something to that when you actually end up, in high school or you play on until college, kind of where you fully develop. It's almost like a benefit to being a late bloomer where you're not so stuck in one position, or like you said, signing to VCU to be a two-way. You kind of can figure out what you're best at, and you're going to be more valuable to your team that you're playing on in high school, and you'll be a better athlete for it once you get to college. And so I'm kind of curious to ask, how much of a difference did you see going from high school baseball into college? That's something that when I played at Maine high school baseball is very much the same as what I would imagine a small town Virginia league would be, where there's maybe one. Like my senior year, there were two guys in the whole state that played Division I baseball. Both of us were pitchers. It was me and a kid from Scarborough, and there was not really like that top tier of talent. And then when you go to college, it's a low 90s arm every night, it seems like. And so what was kind of the transition like for you?
Yeah, so I would say that I don't know the right words here, but I was very naive to the world at that point, right? Baseball wise. And I think that probably benefited me because I remember like some of the guys that had gone to play college, some of the coaches, just kind of telling me like, hey, listen, like you've got a really good arm for high school, but you're not going to be able to do that in college. And in my mind, I was like, listen, like that's who I am. I'm going to do it, right? Like
Yeah, right.
that's all I know. So I literally went into college throwing one pitch, and it was a fastball. I had a curveball, but I had no feel for where it was going. It was just something that was it was a really good high school pitch, but as far as characteristics, right? But no feel for trying to throw it in the strike zone like that. The thing was going to bounce at 50 feet every time, and plenty of bad high school hitters are going to swing at it, right? In college, that didn't happen so much. But this was back pre like pitch counts, right? Like everyone's crazy about pitch counts now. I was on the tail end of where it didn't matter at all. So I went into college as a starter on the weekends at VCU, and I was basically just throwing fastballs. And I would throw 140, 150 pitches a game. And that actually, the only way that works, in my opinion, is to be like effectively wild, and which is what I was. I had no idea what I was doing. I was up there throwing the ball. So one might be here, there, there, there. So if you can do that, right, like you're just doing that randomly, that can be effective throwing only one pitch. But if you're just there, you can't do that. I just was naive and didn't know what I was doing enough where it worked in my favor, and threw hard enough, obviously.
Yeah. So how hard were you throwing back in college, or when you got drafted?
I believe my freshman year of high school, I think I was on average 90 to 93. I don't know what I got up to. It wasn't like it is now where there's radar guns everywhere. So we didn't
Right.
know every start, every pitch we were throwing.
That's still, I mean, that's gas, no doubt, for a freshman to be rolling into college with that. And if you kind of half know where it's going, with the effectively wild part, I feel like that's, there's so many people out there in high school who, in Maine, like I kind of saw that for myself when I was the kid who could touch 90 in high school, and there were kids standing on the back line of the box, like they wanted nothing to do with it.
Right.
And the same effect, you can almost get that same effect where your one pitch is inside, outside, up, down, like, and then the minute you show that second pitch, that third pitch, if you're a starter, like it's a whole new world for the hitters because they almost got to guess at that point.
Right.
But did you
Right.
find it easier once you got to college to pick up a breaking ball or pick up a changeup once you got there, or how was that kind of, you said you didn't have much feel for it in high school, but did it kind of all come along pretty quickly in college?
Yeah. So I had I don't like talking about it like this, but I had a pretty good curveball as far as characteristics go, right?
Yep.
Um, I just didn't have a feel for throwing in the strike zone. So it really wasn't until sometime midway through, I think my sophomore year. It may have even been my junior year. Yeah, I tell you what, it was on the Cape. I played in the Cape after my sophomore season, and that's when I started to figure out some of the stuff with pitching. So what I had to do, I learned that there, and this is probably some really good advice to some young people listening. Um, we get so caught up in throwing to the catcher's glove, right? And I couldn't do that with my curveball. I had to adjust my sights, so it became where if I wanted to throw a strike with my curveball, I had to look at the catcher's mask, and some days I had to look up at like the umpire's mask. And when I wanted to bounce it for that swings and misses, that's when I would look at the glove. So now I talk a lot to my young players about adjusting the sights, right? So like if you're missing up, look down. If you're missing down, look up. Left, look right, right, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's a huge deal that goes overlooked way too often.
That's some good stuff because everybody wants to panic when they can't find their bread and butter pitch on a day. Like if your curveball is your go-to and you don't have it, or you keep spiking it, it's so easy to be like, oh, I lost my curveball, man. I don't know how to, I can't get this thing in the zone. But it could be just a simple adjustment. It's way easier to fix where your eyes are going than to try to fix,
Right.
oh, my wrist needs to be, more on the side.
Exactly.
There's so many little adjustments that you can make. But if you can
Right.
shift your focus, or, shift, set your sights a little bit different. I had some success with that too when I was, because a lot of the times my breaking ball was different every day. One
Right.
day, like you said, one day when it's really good, you got to look above. You got to look above the catcher. One day where it's pretty normal, you're looking at the mask. So I had that same kind of experience where every day is different and your arm's going to be different every day. But if you can kind of, instead of scrapping your whole delivery, if you could just
Right.
keep it down to what you know you can do, and just adjust your sights, that's so much easier than trying to, fix the way you take the ball out of your glove when there's runners on base, and adrenaline will kill all of the little adjustments that you're trying to make. So
Right. No, absolutely.
I feel like
Yeah.
that,
So look, we liken it to like this is what it is. So like around here, most people hunt, right? So when it's time for hunting season, right, you go out and you have to sight your gun in. So it's the same thing. You just have to sight. You have to sight your target in. That's all you're trying to do. And so if you're looking at the mask, right, and throwing your curveball in the strike zone, great. But if you start throwing it to the mask, now you're locked in with your sights. Now change your sights to the glove.
exactly. That's so good,
Keep
because
it simple.
yeah, you don't want to overthink things, and the more, you can almost figure out in your bullpens sometimes before the game, or your couple warm up pitches. Okay, when I get out there, maybe I don't have to look up as high today. You can kind of almost,
Right.
diagnose things before they happen a little bit too, and just being aware of it helps too, because not everybody has the same level of pitching coaching, or people watch
Right.
them all the time to kind of give them some advice. So for all the people listening out there, that's a huge piece of it, is just trying to set your sights a little bit differently. And then at the same time, that must have worked from going to the Cape, and then the next year getting a call from Kansas City in the 6th round. What was that like? What was the second draft day like?
The second draft day was a lot more nerve wracking. The first one, again, I was naive to the whole thing. And I know this sounds weird, but I really didn't care about the draft in high school. Like, it was just not on the radar. The most important thing for me that day was winning that state quarterfinal. I wanted to get the school done and over with. The state quarterfinal was all I cared about. If I got drafted, great. It just is what it is. But it wasn't like something that I was like, oh man, like this is gonna happen, like this is gonna change your life, nothing like that. That didn't. It never entered my head.
You were
The
still playing
second,
shortstop still. You were still thinking about being a shortstop.
yeah, exactly. No, so the second time around was a little bit different because our season had ended. We lost we got beat in the conference tournament final, so we didn't advance to a regional that year. So we had this break leading up to the draft where I wasn't playing, and then the draft. I don't remember exactly what time the draft was. Sometime around 1 o'clock or so, 1 o'clock when it started. I don't remember. So I had that whole day leading up. So I went to the river for a little bit. We live on a water town here on the river, on the Rappahannock River. So I went down there and just hung out at the beach. Then finally came back, and my family was all there, and my wife now, she was my girlfriend at the time. All of her family came over, so we all just kind of hung out and listened to the draft and let that play out. So
You didn't have to
yeah,
wait too long in the 6th round. That must have been pretty awesome, pretty special to have everybody in your corner there, and hear your name in the 6th round. That must have.
yeah. So it was a little bit odd because I was the first pick of the 6th round. So there's a break at the end of every round.
Yeah,
So the 5th round breaks, and then I get a call during the break from the Royals saying that they were going to take me with the next pick. So it wasn't like there was anticipation. Like, I don't know. Like, I knew at that point, like, hey, you're going to be drafted. You're going to be the next name called.
that's so cool. That'll take the edge off a little bit once you know it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but yeah, pretty cool moment to be able to share it with the people there for sure.
That's pretty neat. And then from right on to there, you went to play in the minors with Kansas City, and then ended up with the Blue Jays. Can you talk a little bit about what life in the minors was like, and kind of what you kind of learned along the way there?
Yeah, so fun bus rides, minor league bus rides, where it's at. No, they're not at all. Um,
Yeah, right.
um, yeah, so my first year, I was sent to Idaho Falls, Idaho. So I was playing in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Utah. Beautiful part of the country, but the bus trips are a little bit rough. We were on old like 5-speed buses, right? So stick shift and in the mountains. There's no AC. I don't believe there was any televisions on there either. So we're taking 8 to 10 hour bus rides in the mountains with no AC and no heat. So it's always fun. You either put the latch up when you leave or you leave it down. Whatever it is on the journey there. We broke down a ton that year.
Oh my
I
goodness.
remember we broke down at the field. We had an 8 hour bus ride back home, from Casper, Wyoming. and we broke down at the field while we were trying to take our equipment off. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning. And we actually all stayed in a hotel on the other side of the river there. So it was like a 30-minute walk at 4 a.m. with all of our bags back to the hotel.
That is
So that was one of my first. That was one of my first good ones. Um, so yeah, we had a lot of bus issues that year. We actually had an accident too that in the playoffs that year, which was so fun. Because the driver's excuse, now granted we're in a big charter bus, right? There was traffic just stopped in front of us, and the driver's excuse was that he couldn't see over the cars in front of him.
but he's driving a bus. Oh man. So welcome
I
to
was
the
like,
minor
really?
league.
Like, of all the excuses, of all the excuses. So now they've got it. The cops have to come on the bus and get everyone's name, and we've got like 15 Latin kids who've never really been in America, and they're asking them for their information. Like, come on, man, he doesn't even speak English. What are you
That is
doing?
that is hilarious. Oh my gosh. So it's a whole new world out there for those kids too. That
Yeah, exactly,
tough part of the country
exactly.
to break down and have to be stuck for a little while, but
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. So then my second year was my first full season. Right around the All Star break that year, I got sent to the disabled list, and I stayed there for the next 20 months or so, dealing with various injuries. So, well, I say various, a shoulder, and then ultimately had Tommy John trying to recover from that, which sidelined me. That actually sidelined me for 20 months. So I was on the disabled list essentially for 2.5 straight seasons.
that's wild. So so you had the shoulder. Did you end up getting surgery on your shoulder or just the elbow?
I did not have shoulder surgery, so I just had Tommy John. But I rehabbed the shoulder on and off for about 8 months, and then when I finally came back, I was supposed to make 3 rehab appearances, and in the second one, in the second inning, my elbow went 100% tear. Um, I still had to get 2 more outs. I had a guy on first base. I picked him off, luckily, and then I had to throw 2 more strikes to the hitter in the box, and then that was it. I knew something was not right. So, and then I tried to. That was on a Friday. I played a light catch on Saturday, which was terrible. And then Sunday was an off day because I was in rehab. And then Monday I had a bullpen, and that was not happening. So, had to go in and see the trainers and get new MRIs. And then, yeah, the
Man,
journey began.
that's wild. And so you probably, in my experience, like I told you before, I had Tommy John surgery in 2018, and I learned probably more about
Right.
pitching and mechanics and kind of what to do while you're throwing. They teach you all this stuff so that you don't blow your elbow out again. Was that kind of the same experience that you had when you got the shoulder worked on and then your elbow? Was it kind of the same thing where you learned a bunch of stuff during that time that you were on the shelf for 20 months?
Yeah. So, not so much with the shoulder. The shoulder was just like, I'm going to be fine. Let's return. Everything is fine. But with the elbow, yeah, I knew it was going to be a long journey after the surgery. So it was a lot of, at that point in time, starting to dig and search for information as, hey, why did this happen? What do I need to do now to prevent it from happening? What can I do to be better when I get back? All those sorts of things. So that sort of led me into what I'm doing now, really, because that was mainly the beginnings of this. I was a little bit into like the mechanical stuff and all when I was in high school, but nothing crazy. But that really led me into this journey. Yeah.
I'm kind of the same way. I was trying to figure out why it happened and what I could do right to not have it happen again. And when you came back from the Tommy John surgery, did you see the velocity was still there for you? Did everything kind of come back the same?
Yeah. So it was a really weird process for me. Like I said, it took me 20 months to recover. At 19 months post surgery, I was trying to play catch and I could not play catch. And then I went to spring training, I believe in January that year. And the week before I left for spring training, I still could not play catch. I was in terrible pain. I honestly, I barely packed anything for spring training because I knew that I was coming right back home because I couldn't throw. And when I got to Arizona that year, for whatever reason, I started playing catch. It felt fine. And then like 2 weeks later, they asked me to throw my first bullpen. Maybe it was 3 weeks later because I was there early. Um, and I was just like, all right, here it goes. So I just let it fly and everything was fine. So that's
That's
how that went. And then it was like process. There were days where velocity was down significantly, and days where it was back to normal. It took me probably about halfway through that season, where velocity really started to be stable, where it was always about where it was before, and then later in that year, it started to jump.
What do you think you just kind of got comfortable in your new mechanics and the new elbow was all good to go? Is that kind of the reason for the jump, you think?
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I would love to say that it had to do with the warmer weather. I'm not a cold weather fan at all. Early in the year was always kind of weird for me. Season the velocity started jumping on a consistent basis during the late summer months.
I'm excited for that too. I've been in Maine for quite a while, so I'm excited to get outside and throw in a real mound with some cleats and some nice weather. I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
that again.
I bet.
2021 brings us some good weather and some baseball back. But I'm always curious talking to other people
Yep, absolutely.
that had the Tommy John surgery to see, if they kind of had any troubles or kind of what everybody has it at different points in their career, obviously too, where I think a high school kid probably treats their recovery and their rehab a little bit differently than a college guy, than a pro guy, than a big leaguer, that kind of thing. But the lessons that you kind of learn in the recovery almost, it taught me a good lesson to where the stuff that I did to get me ready to come and pitch again was something that I was like, okay, this got me right. Like I can't not do this anymore. Like, at the extra bands or just making sure I was warmed up to throw rather than throwing to warm up, where um, I didn't have the most, um, I guess, detailed warm up or something like that. I was more of like, let's do a couple arm circles, throw the shoulder across. Yep. All right, here we go. We're ready. But the more that you almost warm up to throw rather than throw to warm up was a big one for me. And then you kind of said too how it transitioned you into what you do now with coaching. Post career. I know you ended up with the Blue Jays after being with the Royals. What was kind of the switch like for you? Once you got done with Toronto.
So the switch was that I had no idea what I was going to be doing. I knew that I was going to go back and finish up my college degree, which I did, and in the process, I had a few guys. So I had a few guys that I worked with, like a few young kids that I worked with when I was home in the winters. Um, and it just so worked out. My brother-in-law, technically he's not my brother-in-law, he's my sister-in-law's husband. I call him my brother-in-law. Um, he played college baseball as a pitcher, and he was coaching at a local high school. So I would go over and throw with him in the winters. And then the head coach of the program that he was a part of asked me like, "Hey man, like when you get done like your work, do you mind working with some of these younger kids? They've asked me about working with you." And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. As long as I get my stuff in first, I don't mind." So that happened. So when I got back, they asked about working with me again, and I was like, "Yeah, sure." And of course, I started going back to school, and a lady that I know right up the road from me had a small garage. So it wasn't really a small garage; it was a pretty decent sized garage, but a small facility that she had built. Her and her husband had built for her daughters. Her one daughter was playing softball at Western Carolina, um, and they had built it for her. So they asked me like, "Hey, listen, like she's off at college now. Nobody's using it. I know you're doing some lessons. If you want to use it, feel free." I was like, "Yeah, you know what? I'm not doing anything else. I'm just back in college, so let me do that." And then there was a local travel team that got started, and they asked me to coach, and I turned them down about 7 times. And then they presented me with an offer that I couldn't refuse, and that was a big warehouse that they had rented out, that I could do all my stuff out of. And I said, "Well, yeah, you know, I don't have to pay anything for it, so yeah, of course I'll do this." Um, so volunteered doing that, and then still going to college, and then things just started progressing more and more and more and more, and yeah, and then I rented out my own place now, so that's just how it all came about. It wasn't necessarily the plan, but here we are.
That's really cool too. And there's so many. You never know where the opportunities are going to come up, and that kind of reminds me of the story that I've kind of had. It was a couple kids here and there, like, hey, like want to show me a few things, and it spirals into a little more, then a little more, then a little more. And so, that might, your story might be foreshadowing a little bit of what I've got coming after my career too. So it's all, I'm going to have to come down and take a visit to the Mozingo baseball facility sometime. You never know. Cause there's
Yeah,
there's all
there you
kinds
go.
of different leagues
Anytime.
everywhere. What's the facility look like now?
Oh man, it's still not great. I tell everybody we're trying to train like Rocky up in here. We don't need all the fancy stuff. It's a it's a 3,000, little over 3,000 square foot facility. It's essentially a basement. It's a physical therapy building upstairs, and they built a basement in this thing. It's 3,000 square feet. We got poles up everywhere for support, right? Um, when we first signed the lease, it was like we only had like 2/3 of the space, so about 2/3 of it is has artificial turf on it. The rest of it is just like the concrete slab that it was built on, right? Not concrete, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so it's still like that. It actually works out because we play some like basketball and football style games as warm ups all the time in there. Um, and that's really bad. We got 2 cages, 3 mounds. We got a weight room set up in there, so bands galore, all kinds of technology. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, we got a
Awesome. That's all
TV on the wall. We
you,
had a second one, but it got busted. Baseball broke that. So yeah,
man, that's all you need though. That's super cool. And I can relate to that for sure with the facilities up here in Maine too. There's not a whole lot of I don't know what the word would be, like all the glamorous, like shiny new workout
yeah, that ain't
machines.
what you're getting when you're coming to Mozingo Baseball. Nope.
No, and that's the way. I mean, you got to grind it out a little bit. So I want to take a trip down
Yeah,
and see the facility myself, because who knows where I'll end up playing next year, and I always know I got somewhere to train and to come out and chop it up. So what I want to get into
yep,
now a little bit,
absolutely.
I want to get into now the young guns. I want to see. I want to hear a little bit more about this, because I think more people, getting this show out to more people and seeing what you've got out here at Mozingo Baseball. I want you to talk about the young guns a little bit.
Yeah, so Young Guns is something else that came about by accident. Well, I shouldn't say by accident, but you'll understand what I mean as I tell the story. So I was kind of working with a tech company on a project they were doing that ended up not happening, but it's a pretty interesting thing they were trying to do. Um, it was going to be tough to do, but it was interesting nonetheless. So they asked me to get involved with it, and I said sure. As long as you're willing to do certain things that I want to see done differently than what you're thinking right now, I'm all for it. So they said yes. So what I did was I started writing I just started writing like sections for like things they could put in this piece of technology they wanted to do. And as I was doing it, I was like, man, like this is like writing like a paragraph. Like these are all just paragraphs. It's writing like a chapter, right? And I was like, gosh, like I'll keep doing this on different sections. And I was like, I'll just write a little small like guide to go with the stuff, right? Like that's what I'll do. So told them about it. They're like, yeah, sure. I said, yeah, I think looking at it, it's probably going to be about 20 pages. So cool. So I sat down and I started writing. As I was doing this, the project fell through, but I was like, man, I'm already 2/3 of the way done. I'm going to keep doing this. And I was on like page 20 at the time, right? I was like, man, like I'm just going to be more than 30, more than 20. But cool. And I kept writing and kept writing and kept writing, and it ended up being a 90-page e-guide. So it was just layered, like it was just like different subjects. So what it was like one section was supposed to be like on control, one section was on velocity, one section was on like pitch design type stuff, right? That's what it was made for the piece of technology they were working on. And so I was like, man, like these are chapters. So that's how it came about, and then like I just kept expanding, and that's it. It ended up being a 90-page e-guide.
That's so
And
cool. And
then
you already
yeah, and then go ahead, go.
No, I was gonna say you almost like already had it started and ready to go before, that's why I said by accident. And that kind of it turns into a perfect little book there, where the e-guide is like double, triple, 4 times as much information as what you thought it was originally going to be in. So that's awesome.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So and I'll be honest, it was awful to go through. Like once I decided like this is gonna be an actual e-guide that I'm gonna sell, Um, it was an awful process. It took months. Like it was just like nonstop. Like, no, I don't like this. Go back. And I'm not one who can just like delete a word or two. Like I have to go back and delete the whole paragraph and start over, and sometimes the entire section and start over. So it was a frustrating process. I've never written anything like that. I'm reluctant to say that I never will again, but maybe we'll see. It's been a few years now, so I'm not quite as mad at the process anymore. But it was super frustrating. The day that it was done, I just like created a PayPal thing for it, created a link, and just put it out there, put it on Twitter. Like, listen, I've got it. If you want it, get it, because I don't want to see it ever again. So it was kind of one of those deals. I didn't market it or anything. It was just like, it's on my website. If you want it, go get it. I'm done with it. So then several months later, I was like, you know what? I probably need to start like actually marketing this thing a little bit. Um, so I started doing that. It started getting a little bit of sales. And then I guess sometime right around January of last year, so about a year ago, I was like, you know what? I need to take this thing to a new level. So I started creating video content to go along with it as supplemental content, right? Originally, that was supposed to be like, hey, you know what? Not everyone wants to read a 90-page e-guide. Let me put it in like an audio format. But I didn't want to do it like word for word. I thought that would be a little bit boring. So I was like, let me just take like sections out of this stuff and just like paraphrase it in video format. Um, and it turned into like just like video, just a ton of video content. We're at 50 videos now. Um, and I ended up creating like a whole tutorial on ground force. So it was like a ground force video series, which I don't know if you saw anything with the ground force stuff I was doing, but I used a Wii board. I used a Wii board for a few years trying to figure this thing out. So a Wii board can act as a force plate. And finally, one day we started figuring things out. And then it turned into, hey, like we know a lot about ground force off of a stinking Wii board, right? So put out the video series, and that's been fairly popular as well.
That's so cool. And man, the ground force stuff, that's something that's so intriguing to me, where uh I was somebody who didn't, I mean, I didn't know a ton about it before kind of digging into this punch out pitching and different, talking to different people and stuff like that. But I saw people, you know, Kyle talks about it all the time with Driveline. They had Wii like Bluetooth sensors that they were trying to work on for bats and stuff. I mean, all the different stuff. So you never really know where some you know unlocks are going to come from. And so I was
Right.
somebody with the ground force type stuff. I was a taller, skinny kid in high school, and then in college put on some strength. So I wonder if I would have got my hands on that Wii board, what I could have learned from, you know, now I'm 6'5", 230 pounds. Like now I wonder, you got any, you know, any quick ground force tips for the people listening out there? And this is mostly aimed at me, but me asking for the kids out there. This is for me. What do you got?
Right. So the ground force stuff is actually very misunderstood because everyone that I've ever seen, so it was like one of those things where there's no guidance on ground force, right? When it comes to pitching, because everyone always looks at the raw data, like this is back leg force, this is front leg force, right? And none of that stuff really matters too much. So there, like I said, there was no guidance, especially with a Wii board, right? Like nobody's doing that. So but there were things that mattered, and it wasn't so much like what peak force is in the rear leg, but the timing of when peak force occurred mattered a huge deal. So that's going to be like during the sitting process. So if you sit, like I know people talk about like anchoring the back foot and all that stuff now, right? So if you actually sit into the whole foot, right, and keep it flat, like during the sitting process, you can have a pretty decent spike in ground force, right? If you get to the toes super early, you can't make that thing spike too much at all. So that was one of the first things, was like the other thing that we get with the force, we don't just get force, we get center of pressure. It's like exactly where you're applying pressure to the board, right? And that's a bigger deal than the actual force numbers. So the timing of peak force matters. The force matters on the front leg, but not by itself again either. That's another really irrelevant one. I know a lot of people talk about that front leg, like the lockout and all that stuff, and front leg force matters. Front leg force matters, but it only matters based off of the internal rotation force that you applied. So there's two things. There's two forces that matter with the back leg, and that's that it happens during the sit, and then there's going to be that moment of internal rotation. How much force you can apply during internal rotation is a huge deal, and then that difference between front leg force and the internal rotation force is what the biggest deal of the whole thing is. Because the second one, so the first one is just maintaining the load, right? When you go to sit, that's just maintaining the load, right? Establishing a load. That internal rotation force, that's rotational power. And that's what we want. We want to rotate into the front foot strike, right? But we want to do it with very powerful movement in a short window. That's what we're looking for. And then we want to make sure that we're transitioning well into the front leg, which is that when you look at force from in the front leg versus that internal rotation force, that's just a transfer. That's all that is, just a transfer of weight, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure we do that well. And then the last thing is really to make sure that the force in the front leg, so really not the force, but that we become stable in the front leg, right? So we'll see force like the center of pressure graph that we'll look at there. Force initially shifts towards the toes and towards the outside of the foot when you land, because for the momentum is going forward and then we're rotating, right? So the force goes there, and then how quickly and how well we can slam on the brakes and get back to the midline and maintain that is the other thing that matters a huge deal. So it's nothing super crazy, but it's pretty cool that it'll show up.
That is awesome, and I know people will get it. You can dig into it way more on the Young Guns and the EGuide and all the videos that are within that. So I would recommend it to anybody who is trying to dig in a little deeper, trying to learn a little bit more, and the ground force stuff, man. You just like people need to go back 2-3 minutes and like re-listen to that, take some notes on it. Like that's good stuff. Not a lot of people are talking about that either. It's hard to kind of put that into words almost, where
Right.
so much of coaching, at least that I've found in my short time doing it, both now just over a year, it's like the good coaches end up saying less, where it's like you can
Right.
simplify and boil it down into what you just did right there. Everything makes sense when you're thinking about different pressure points and how you're applying the rotation and trying to stick the landing. And almost the easiest way for somebody to learn is just with a coach that's keeping it simple. And
Right.
I feel like you do a really good job of that. So I'm trying
I
to
try. You never know. Sometimes, most of the time as coaches, you're thinking like, gosh, man, I don't know what I'm doing. Why can't I get this kid better, right? But no, I try to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, that's a good lesson that I got to kind of take some of my own advice on. Is I'm somebody who, if you laid out a 90-page ebook or something like that, I'm going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to be like, okay, I'm up on the mound now. Am I sitting down? Like, is this piece right? And is this piece right? And then, okay, does this, so I'm somebody who's like, I'll over.
Don't do that. Don't do that. That'll mess you up in a hurry.
Yeah. So that's what my next point was going to be. So what do you kind of say to the kid who like me is trying to think of every little piece when they're on the mound? How do you kind of shift them away from that? Cause I like to think that I've gotten better, but everybody has a different way of putting this.
Yes, this is such a funny question, because I tell the guys in my building all the time, I'm like, listen, like, obviously I use a lot of technology now. I'm into this stuff. But if I was a player, like if somebody would have brought this to me as a player, I would have told them to kick rocks. I'm not listening to this. I know what I'm doing enough. Like I'm getting people out. I'm throwing hard. Just leave me alone, right? And not saying that's how people should be either. It's probably somewhere in the middle ground, right? So what I tend to do is I try to tell most of my guys, like, don't worry about this stuff. Let me worry about this stuff, right? You just worry about going out there and executing. We'll give you a few specific things you need to focus on. You focus on them. Don't try to think about everything. Um, However, I have found out that there are some kids out there that can handle a lot of the knowledge, and I'll just be thinking a lot during everything they're doing. So I have to give those guys a little bit more information than what I'm usually comfortable giving, and some of them are fine with it. Some are not. Some of the guys I'm just not going to give much to. Like, what does this mean? Don't worry about it. Just go throw. The other guys, I'll sit down and break it down as much as they want. So I think that's kind of the key. One of the things I learned from a pitching coach that I trusted, was that every single individual is like is a piece to a puzzle. You've got to figure out where they fit. So I try to take that and run with it with everything that I do, and not just try to force them into the different sections. Right? Like, you got to figure them out for individuals, and then figure out what they need and what they don't need. So hopefully that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that's so good, and everybody's different. You know, that's what makes you such a good coach is you're able to identify, okay, this kid needs more, this kid needs less, and you know, I think that's good for people listening in. Like, you know, it was like you said before, it kind of was different where the old school kind of thing, you just go out there and get people out. You don't, you know, if you're pitching well, you're pitching well. That's it. Where now I feel like there's more of a shift towards the data, towards the numbers, and so have you seen kind of the differences now from, you know, being out of it for a couple of years now? Like, what do you see the differences from the time that you were in it
Oh,
to what you're seeing now
oh
in
man.
2021?
Man, the game is night and day from when I got done playing here. Yeah, I mean, like you said, just the reliance on data, technology, like all the stuff with analytics. Analytics has always been around. I know it's a buzzword now and gets a lot of negative connotation from the older people, but analytics has been around forever. Like literally, we're talking about any stat. Like stats have been around baseball forever, right? And we've always found ways to quantify what people are doing. That's just how it's always been. It's just newer stuff. I do think sometimes we tend to swing the pendulum too far in that direction, and we forget about like what we're seeing with our eyes, right? Because there is that component to the game that sometimes gets lost. But no, I mean, look, the training is way different now. Um, the focus of so every team obviously has different things that they value, but more and more of them are kind of going in line with each other. Um, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a power-driven game right now, for sure. With the Royals, we were based on speed. We wanted the Royals were big on like athletic pitchers, not necessarily guys that threw real hard necessarily, but they wanted athletic pitchers, not big pitchers. So like we shared a spring training complex with the Rangers, and the Rangers were all about like these big, tall, muscular-looking pitchers, right? They didn't necessarily move all that well, they were big, strong country guys that threw hard, right? The Royals had a lot of these smaller athletes. So I'm 6'1", 190 when I played. I'm 200 now, but 6'1", 190 when I played, and that was probably not too far from the average of what the Royals were going after. Granted, a lot of them threw very hard too, but it was more about the faster moving down the mound guys versus guys that could rely on force, right? We were relying more on speed. And the same thing from a hitting standpoint. They were big on like bunting and playing really good defense, being really fast in the field. And obviously, they had a lot of success there winning that World Series, but the game turned in a hurry right after they went on that run.
Yeah, that's what I was just
And
about to
now we
say.
live in a.
It worked. It worked for them. They got their World Series,
It
and then
did. It did.
yeah, and then it flipped, like
Yep.
completely flipped. And obviously, the Rangers, the other team in your complex, it hasn't worked out so well for them yet. I mean, they were in the playoffs and all that, you know, so they did all right. But that's the, I mean, that I think
Right.
the Rangers. That's when you see like Jose Bautista with the bat flip, and that was against the
Right. Right. Right.
like
Right.
they
Yep.
haven't exactly been on the good side of things. So, and every organization's different, of course. And did you kind of see like Toronto was a little bit different than Kansas City, or
Oh my goodness, night and day. Toronto was really like on the forefront of this new age hitting stuff, um, because the running joke when I got over there, I was only there 2 months, but the running joke was we're all about bombs and punchies. So they were just like literally practicing. Like they would take guys out, the middle lineup guys. So it was like 4 or 5 of them on the high A team that I was on, and they would just go out and like front toss, and they're just trying to drop bombs. I was like, wow, this is way the Royals. This would this would never have happened. It was all about like moving runners. Not that they weren't not they were against home runs. They just wasn't a big focus. It was more, you know, we want guys that can bunt, we want guys that can move them over, and we want guys that can drive them in.
yeah,
Um,
now just
we
drop
didn't
ball.
want a lot of strikeouts. Now yeah, it's like I don't care if you strike out, if you can hit a bunch of balls out of the ballpark, we're good. And then from the pitching standpoint, there were no real rules with the Blue Jays, which is really weird because the Royals were very strict and had absolutes. I think it was 4 absolutes that every pitcher had to do. So everything was like very detailed, which can be very good for a lot of people. I don't want that to sound like a negative because it's not. It was just different. So the Royals were like, you had to be clean shaven. You couldn't have hair coming down on your neck. Um, you couldn't have facial hair. You could have a mustache. That was the only thing you could have, like the Yankees, right?
Right.
The Blue Jays are like, I don't care what you do, just show up, get
Show up,
outs,
hit
we're
ball,
good.
get outs, get it, get in, get out.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're good, we're good,
That's
we're
super
good. So
cool.
yeah, it was very different.
That's awesome. And I think it's almost a good way to wrap it up where the game has shifted so much, and maybe the trends that we're seeing now might end up flipping back to the Roy Halladay's of the world, where there was more sinkers and sliders and trying to go east and west with your pitches, versus right now it's going up and down with the high fastball that carries and drops. You think that's, are you on that same thing where it kind of goes in trends and waves like that, or what do you think? Or is this
Oh man,
this
so that you really putting me on the spot. So I try to I try as hard as I can not to be either new school or old school, right? I try to be somewhat very in the middle with all this stuff, right? Take the best of both. I think for the most part, this is in general now. Most people are. It's more beneficial to be north and south, just because the strike zone's bigger that way. Um, and it's a much different plane for the bat to get on high and low versus east and west. Now I'm not saying not everyone should. There are certain guys that need to pitch east and west, absolutely. And I'm not opposed to that in any way. You just have to understand that the strike zone is bigger the other way, and it changes the hitter's path drastically going north and south than it does east and west. Obviously, it's a little bit different, but mostly east and west is just a matter of getting it deep versus getting it out in front. North and south is a whole different level there, right? I'm not saying you can't go up and in, down and away, stuff like that. That's changing all kinds of things, but that's still components of both, which obviously are always working. We used to call it changing eye levels, right? And now they're talking about like tunneling pitches and stuff like that, right? It's all the same stuff. I don't care what you call the stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean that's really my thoughts on it. I don't think you have to be stuck. Like if you're a sinker slider guy, like you don't have to be north and south for sure. Like you can go east and west, and that's got to be where you're successful at. So
Yeah,
that's just
ultimately it's
how I am on the stuff.
yeah. I like that answer too, because every pitcher is different. Everybody's got to stick to their own strengths rather than what's hot right now. And I honestly like the way that you said with it's the strike zone's bigger north and south. It's true. Like you only have 17 inches of plate to go east west.
Yeah. Well, so look, like the game that I grew up with watching in the major leagues in the 90s, I was a big Braves fan growing up. Maddox, Glavine, right? Smoltz, Avery. Um, the strike zone was much wider back then. So you could be a lot more east west. You were going to have a lot more success with that. The strike zone is not as wide anymore. And I know that some of the old school guys like to argue like that you don't want to be this way, you want to be this way, which is fine. I get it. And if the strike zone was, you had 4 inches on both sides all the time, then yeah, absolutely. But that's just not reality anymore. So
That's a huge point where the zone isn't 2 feet wide across. I mean, that's there's only so much you can do, and I feel like the robot umpires are going to come in sometime and really tighten up the zone even more.
I hope not. I hope not. I hope not. I hope not. I'm not a fan of Roboumps. So just
We
throw that out there. Disclaimer now.
we can put that on
No
record.
Roboumps.
we
No
can
Roboumps.
we'll put that on
No, man. I
record.
mean, look, we need that human element. Missed calls are a big part of sports. I don't like it in anything. Don't like it in football, basketball. I don't like it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Maybe I'm the grumpy old man. I don't know. I just don't like it.
I don't think so. I could see it going either way. I would like to think that pitchers would still have an advantage if they can't get a little bit of stuff. Pitchers should still have the advantage anyways. They got the ball in their hand, and you still got to hit it and find a hole with where that ball gets hit. But I don't know. I feel like there's too many people that are complaining and enough noise is being made where maybe that happens. But I know you're definitely on team no robot switch.
Yeah, yeah. Look, and then go one more thing that we probably should touch on. Going back to the north-south thing now, with the spin rates like they are, and the obvious of what's going on. We won't necessarily get into that, but the obvious of what's going on. guys are making the North and South play much, much different than what it normally would. And it benefits them just a tremendous amount to go North and South when they're manipulating what's going on with the spin of the baseball.
Yeah. So we'll save that
We'll
experience.
leave that one alone.
We'll save that for another day. But maybe shoot Mozingo Baseball a DM if you want to find out a little bit more about what we've got behind the curtain. But Harold, thank you for coming on here. I really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll have to catch up again soon once in person stuff happens. I'd love to come down and take a visit, like I said, and get to hang out in person too. That'd be awesome.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. This was awesome.